The mountains of southern Vietnam rise in thick green folds, dense with bamboo and teak, vines hanging like curtains between the canopy layers. Rain falls here almost daily during the monsoon season, turning the earth to mud and filling the air with the hum of insects and the calls of birds unseen. This is not a place where humans often venture. The terrain is steep, the undergrowth impenetrable, the nearest villages hours away by foot. It is a place of isolation. In November of 1992, the weather over this region was worsening. Cyclone Forest was approaching from the east, bringing heavy cloud cover and turbulence. Commercial flights between Ho Chi Minh City and the coastal resort town of Nha Trang had to navigate through mountain passes, following a route that required precision in good conditions and considerable skill in bad weather. The air was thick. Visibility was poor. On the morning of November 14th, Vietnam Airlines Flight 474 prepared for departure. It was a scheduled domestic service, routine in every respect. The aircraft was a Yakovlev Yak-40, a Soviet-built trijet designed in the 1960s. It was small, seating only 31 people. The cabin was cramped, the seats close together, the overhead bins minimal. By Western standards, it was outdated. But in Vietnam, still rebuilding after years of war and isolation, it was sufficient. Among the passengers that morning was a 31-year-old Dutch woman named Annette Herfkens. She was a bond trader, educated at Leiden University, and had spent the previous years working in financial centers across Europe and South America. At the time of the flight, she was based in Madrid, employed by Santander Bank. She had arrived in Vietnam 2 days earlier, not for business, but to see someone. Traveling with her was her fiancé, Willem van der Pas, known to friends and family as Pasha. He was 36 years old, also Dutch, also a banker. 6 months earlier, he had moved to Ho Chi Minh City to open 2 branches for ING Bank. The assignment was temporary, but the separation had been difficult. Annette and Pasha had been together for 13 years. They had met as university students in Leiden, fallen in love in their 4th year, and had since lived together or apart, depending on where their careers took them. They had always intended to marry. They spoke often of settling somewhere permanent, perhaps New York, and starting a family. The trip to Nha Trang was Pasha's idea. He wanted to surprise Annette with a romantic getaway, a few days on the coast where they could be together without the pressures of work. She had arrived in Vietnam exhausted from travel, and he had met her at the airport with his usual energy, taking her on a whirlwind tour of the city before dinner at one of his favorite restaurants. They were happy. They talked about the future. The next morning, they packed light and headed to the airport. Annette was uncomfortable from the moment she saw the plane. She was claustrophobic, and the Yak-40 looked small and outdated. She suggested they take a car instead. Pasha explained that the road was poor, the journey long, that they would lose most of their time together just getting there. She hesitated, but eventually boarded. Pasha told her the flight would be short, only 20 minutes. It was a small lie, meant to ease her anxiety. The actual flight time was closer to an hour. They found their seats near the middle of the cabin. Annette sat by the window. Pasha sat beside her. The other passengers were a mix of Vietnamese nationals and a few foreign travelers. The crew consisted of 6 people. The cabin was loud with the sound of the engines. The plane began to taxi. Takeoff was uneventful. The aircraft climbed into thick cloud cover, the visibility outside the windows dropping to near zero. Annette tried to relax. Pasha held her hand. The flight continued southwest along the coast, following the standard route toward Nha Trang. 40 minutes passed. Then, without warning, the plane dropped sharply. Passengers gasped. Annette looked at Pasha. His face had changed. He was no longer calm. He turned to her and said quietly, "This I don't like." The plane dropped again, harder this time. Someone screamed. Pasha grabbed Annette's hand tightly. the cabin went dark. The Yak-40 had descended below a safe altitude while attempting to approach Nha Trang Airport in poor visibility. It struck trees along a mountain ridge in the Oak Ka range, tearing off part of the wing. The impact was violent. The fuselage broke apart, metal twisted, seats were ripped from their moorings, bodies were thrown forward, backward, into the ceiling, into each other. The plane came to rest on a steep slope, partially intact, surrounded by wreckage and dense jungle. The sound of the crash echoed briefly through the mountains, then faded into the constant noise of rain and insects. Annette Herfkens did not remember the moment of impact. She did not remember how she got out of the plane. When she regained consciousness, hours had passed. She was lying outside the fuselage, perhaps 30 yards downslope from the main wreckage, under the cover of trees. Her body was broken. She could not move her legs. Her left hip and knee were shattered in multiple places, 12 fractures in total. Her jaw was dislocated, hanging loose. One lung had collapsed, making it difficult to breathe. Her shin bone protruded through the skin, 4 inches of pale bone visible through torn flesh. She was barefoot. Her wraparound skirt had been torn away in the crash. She was wearing only her blouse. She lay still for a long time, trying to understand what had happened. The jungle around her was green, impossibly green, layered with ferns and vines and bamboo. The sound was overwhelming. Insects buzzed, birds called, rain pattered on the leaves. Slowly, she became aware of other sounds, faint moans, human voices, weak and irregular, coming from inside the plane. She turned her head, slowly, and saw the wreckage above her. The fuselage was crumpled, partially open. She could see bodies inside. She could see bodies on the ground. Then she saw Paja. He was lying across the aisle from where they had been sitting. His seat had flipped backward in the impact. He was still strapped in. His ribs had been crushed into his lungs by the force of the seatbelt. He was dead. His face was peaceful. He had a small smile on his lips, as if he had been in the middle of a pleasant thought when the crash occurred. Annette stared at him. She did not cry. Crying would have required strength she did not have. Near her, a few feet away, was a Vietnamese man. He was alive, but badly injured. He spoke to her in broken English. "Don't worry," he said. "They will come for us." He opened a small suitcase that had somehow remained with him and gave her a pair of trousers to cover her legs. The gesture was kind, practical. They spoke briefly, then fell silent. Each retreated into their own pain. Over the next few hours, the moaning from inside the plane grew quieter. One by one, the voices stopped. The Vietnamese man beside her grew weaker. His breathing became labored. By the second day, he was dead. A maggot crawled out of his eye. Annette looked away and did not look back. She was alone. She established a routine. Every movement was agony, but she moved anyway. She could not stand, she could not walk, but she could drag herself forward using her elbows, pulling her broken body inch by inch across the ground. She did this to reach the wreckage. She had seen a piece of the wing nearby, and she knew that inside the wing there was insulation, a fibrous material that could absorb water. She needed water more than anything. It took hours to reach the wing. The pain was so intense that she fainted twice. When she finally reached it, she pulled out small tufts of the insulation and placed them around her, within arm's reach. Then she waited for rain. It came often, sometimes several times a day. When it rained, the tufts soaked up the water like sponges. She would squeeze them into her mouth, a few drops at a time, and swallow. Every 2 hours, she allowed herself one sip. After each sip, she congratulated herself. "Good," she would say aloud. "That was good." She did not allow herself to think about rescue in abstract terms. She did not ask herself, "What if they don't come?" She did not imagine tigers or snakes. She stayed in the present moment. She made plans that were small and achievable. She focused on what she could control: her breathing, her water intake, her position in the undergrowth. She also focused on the jungle itself. At first, it had been frightening, but over time, it became something else. She began to notice details: the way sunlight filtered through the canopy in the early morning, the different shades of green in the leaves, the way raindrops clung to the ferns, catching the light. She would stare at these things for hours. It became a form of meditation, a way to keep her mind from collapsing into fear or grief. On the third day, she realized she had not cried since the crash. She understood why. Crying would weaken her. Crying would open a door she could not afford to open. Every time she thought of Pasha, she forced herself to stop. She would look at her engagement ring, still on her finger, and then she would turn her attention back to the leaves, the rain, the sound of the jungle. She did think of her life before the crash. She thought of her childhood in the Netherlands, of her parents and siblings. She thought of her work in Madrid, of the trading floor where she had been the only woman. She thought of the bond markets, of the way losses were managed, of the need to accept reality rather than deny it. She applied this logic to her situation. Pasha was gone. The plane was destroyed. She was injured. These were facts. She accepted them. By the fourth day, gangrene had set into her toes. She could see the discoloration, the smell faint but unmistakable. She did not dwell on it. She continued her routine: water, breathing, small movements. She wore a blue plastic poncho she had found in someone's pack, though it did little to keep her dry. She did not take anything else from the wreckage. It did not seem appropriate to search the bodies. Time began to blur. She could not tell how many days had passed. She counted them by the rhythm of rain and light, but the sequence became difficult to track. She grew weaker. Her body was shutting down. On what she later calculated to be the seventh day, she experienced something she could not explain. She felt herself leaving her body. The pain disappeared. She felt an overwhelming sense of peace. She was aware of the jungle, of the brightness of the leaves, but she was also somewhere else. She felt surrounded by love, by the presence of everyone she had ever cared about. She did not know if she was dying. She did not know if this was death. Then she heard a sound: cracking wood, footsteps. She opened her eyes and saw a man on the other side of the ravine. He was wearing an orange hood. He was staring at her. She waved. She tried to call out, but her voice was weak. The man did not move. He looked at her as if she were a ghost. Then he disappeared. She did not know if he had been real, but he had been real. The man in the orange hood was a local policeman. A search operation had been underway since the day after the crash, but the dense jungle and poor weather had made it nearly impossible to locate the wreckage. The policeman had been part of a team combing the mountains. When he saw Annette, he thought she was a spirit. He had never seen a white woman before. But he returned to the search base and reported what he had seen. The following day, on November 22nd, a rescue team reached the crash site. They carried body bags, expecting to find only corpses. When they saw Annette alive, they were stunned. They showed her a passenger list. She pointed to her name. They lifted her onto a canvas stretcher and began the long descent down the mountain. They removed their shoes so they could step more carefully on the wet rocks, so as not to jar her injuries. It took hours. At the base of the mountain, she was airlifted to Ho Chi Minh City, then transferred to a hospital in Singapore. The injuries were extensive: 12 fractures in her hip, 2 fractures in her leg, a dislocated jaw, a collapsed lung, gangrene in her toes. She underwent multiple surgeries, skin grafts, treatments for infection. Her family flew in from the Netherlands. Friends arrived from around the world. They had all believed she was dead. The news of her survival made international headlines, but the psychological recovery was slower. Pasha's funeral was held on December 10th in Breda in the Netherlands. Annette attended, brought into the church on a stretcher. She described the experience later as surreal, like a bride being carried down the aisle to meet her groom in his coffin. She walked again on New Year's Eve at her parents' home. It was painful, but she could stand. She could move. In February of 1993, just 3 months after the crash, she returned to her job in Madrid. She needed the structure. She needed to rebuild. The cause of the crash was never officially determined. The investigation concluded that the aircraft had descended below a safe altitude during the approach to Nha Trang Airport, striking trees on a mountain ridge. Poor weather and limited visibility were contributing factors, but the exact sequence of errors that led to the crash remained unclear. 30 people died on Vietnam Airlines Flight 474. Annette Herfkens was the only survivor. In the years that followed, she moved to New York, married a colleague, and had 2 children. She wrote a book about her experience. She became a motivational speaker. She returned to Vietnam a decade later to revisit the crash site and to meet the people who had rescued her, including the man in the orange hood. While she was there, a young girl approached her. The girl was crying. She said her father had been part of the rescue operation. A helicopter had been dispatched to retrieve Annette from the mountain, but that helicopter had also crashed. 8 people had died, including the girl's father, a doctor. It was a second tragedy, linked to the first. Annette climbed the mountain one more time. She found the place where she had lain for 8 days. She left a small seal ornament, because that had been her nickname for Pasha. She did not find closure. She found something else, an opening, a way forward. Survival, she came to understand, is not a single event. It is a process, but continues long after the immediate danger has passed. It is the daily work of accepting loss, of staying present, of focusing on what is rather than what might have been. In the jungle, she had learned to divide her suffering into small, manageable pieces, to congratulate herself for each small victory, to find beauty even in the most hostile environment. These were lessons she carried with her for the rest of her life. The jungle, she said later, had become her safe place. In moments of stress or need, she would return to it in her mind. She would see the leaves, the light, the rain. She would feel the stillness. The place where she had lost everything had also become the place where she had learned how to survive.